Oceans, lakes, rivers, ice, deep wells or clouds, still or moving, water is the source of our life. But as we learn to use water to travel, to grow food, to generate energy, to create healthy places, or simply to have fun, we also discovered how much our future depends on this vital resource. And while pollution drains life from our seas, rivers are drying, and access to water is an ever-growing challenge. We believe our journey with water is just starting. What if we could benefit more from our water systems by protecting them? What if we could turn the tide on the destruction of our oceans? What if we unlocked the deep ocean's floor secrets and continued exploring? While 1% of water is available to humankind, what if we understood its true economic and social cost? And what if we could advance women and children's health and education by achieving universal access to water? We believe we can, by sharing our knowledge, inspiring each other, by better understanding and protecting Earth's waters. We believe it is possible to build a brighter future. So, what if it started here, today?
And welcome to today's World Majlis, Living Oceans, reversing our impact on marine ecosystems as part of Water Week for Expo 2020. Welcome to those who are joining us virtually and to our distinguished panels. The goal here today in the Terra Pavilion is the Sustainability Pavilion, and those kind of very concerned about the oceans, or in the conversation we'll have today, the ocean itself, as we think about it, and also the relationship between climate change and the climate challenges and the role of the ocean in society and in our relationship to nature. We have a fantastic panel joining us, a very disparate panel in terms of the specialties that they bring to us here in the Terra Pavilion, but also virtually, and I'll introduce them. But just let me set a framework for our discussion. It's going to be 90 minutes, the last 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the pace and how much we cover in our roundtable discussion amongst ourselves. We want to get questions from the audience. So we have 2 microphones that I'll call upon from our ushers to get your insights into the conversation. This is part 2, or segment 2, of a 4-part series and the deep dive by the World Majlis to explore oceans, the potential, the exploration without exploitation, but also how to live in conjunction with the oceans and understand it. And that's a very important framework, if you will, about educating society about the potential of the ocean today and the next generations, I think. Let me introduce those that are here and those virtually. Irene Henniger is the head of Artists and Labs at Zurich University of the Arts, IREN. You can just give a quiet nod because we're doing it in the order of our script here. Tom Ennis is the founder and principal of Think Design, the USA. It's good to see you, Tom. Thanks for joining us. Jo Ruxton is MBE based in Cornwall, a cold water swimmer, which is very interesting. She'll share her tales on that. And founder of Ocean Generation in the UK, working on educating society through documentary productions as well. Her disciplines in the marine world and what she feels about the education systems of today and tomorrow. Mohammed Salis is a pearl diver and field researcher at Danat, the Institute for Pearls and Gemstones. He joins us in person from the Kingdom of Bahrain. It's good to see. He brings a perspective as a diver of oysters and has lived that indigenous way of lifestyle, something that the Kingdom of Bahrain has been wanting to protect, and the role of Danat, but also for the GCC. What do we expect in the future of protecting the ecosystems here? Professor Dr. Zaini Ujang is the Secretary General of Ministry of Environment and Water from the great government of Malaysia. Good to see you. I said Dato Sri, so that means you must have visited Malaysia. It's an honorific title, but one very deserved for the work that you've done in this space. And also joining us virtually, we can bring them on the screen. Nita Jensen is the CEO of Rev Ocean in Norway. Good to see you. She's at the bottom half of the screen. And Katja Nicolette, a PhD scientist aboard the Energy Observer, not as we speak, but she's a doctor in marine biology she'll talk about what they have in terms of the catamaran that's running off of hydrogen today and what potential it holds for the shipping industry. When we discussed yesterday in our roundtable about exploration of the oceans and not exploitation, we talked about the potential of bringing in different renewable fuels into the shipping industry. And Katya will say, this is the first stage of it, but they're experimenting on what the future looks like. So let's give a warm welcome to our panelists, both here and abroad. We're going to have some interventions as well from Mauritius, talking about coral reefs and the protection, and that's why it's so important, and I'll bring that up during our conversation. And I noted in my opening remarks, because this is such a diverse group of people, I wanted to start in kind of a wider entry point, if you will, about the conversations of the different oceans around the world in relation to climate change itself. But most everybody in this panel has talked about the ocean, if you take a different perspective of it, in terms of the human relationship. And I think, Tom, it's a good place to start. Because of its vastness in this one ocean mentality, do we need to redefine the relationship, if you will, of the human being and relating to the ocean, its power, its potential, but also its preciousness? Would you say that's a good way to frame it?
I think that's a great way to frame it, and we need deeply to redefine that, because most people and few societies have really a defined relationship with the ocean, or one that's actually conscious and understood. The ocean is somewhere out there. It's vast, and so one way to think about it is it's too big to screw up. But another way to think about it is if somebody's screwing it up, it's somebody else's problem to fix. And so really thinking about a reciprocal relationship to the ocean, no matter where we live, we're connected to it, carry it inside ourselves. That to me is really important and essential to change the way people behave with respect to the ocean.
Well, this is an interesting thing, and I'll even get you to comment about this after I call on Joe. It's so vast, but so beautiful that people don't seem to want to mess with the ocean. They think it's somebody else's problem. So how do we kind of close this gap to say we have responsibility to the ocean?
I think people think of it as so huge, and there's an expression certainly that I grew up with, and I've heard many times, there's plenty more fish in the sea, or that you can deep six something, throw it away, it'll disappear into the deep. But it is finite, and it connects us all. And I think the one thing that I would like to see is ocean science coming into general school education. All children can tell you that the oxygen that we breathe comes from forests. Nobody taught me that more than half of it comes from the ocean. And I think if we grow up knowing that the ocean is our life support system, I think we would respect it more, and we would want to keep it healthy for the sake of everything that lives on the planet, not just something to receive our effluent and our waste, and something to just take everything out of it.
No, in fact, you said something profound in our green room conversation, that when we think about the great forests of the world, that they serve as the lungs of society, but we overlook the oceans. Yes.
And why don't we grow up knowing that? I mean, a mangrove tree will sequester something like 4 times more CO2 than a normal terrestrial tree. And yet people think of mangroves as dirty swamps. You know, let's clear them and build an oceanfront property. We need to understand the connection that we have, and coastal ecosystems are vitally important.
Yes, we had the conversation yesterday, which we can bring up a little bit later too, about blue carbon. Yes. You know, how do we restore our coastlines? I think Malaysia, of course, Doctor, lives surrounded by the great seas, right, around it. You have this terminology, the pursuit of planetary health, and the role of oceans, or the ocean has in that. What do you articulate in that area?
Thank you, John. When we started a new ministry called Ministry of Environment and Water in Malaysia, it's about 2 years ago, we were looking for a guiding principles in order for us to understand environment as a whole. Then we decided to work on planetary health, whereby we look at planet as a holistic entity. Whatever you do to the planet, it will affect other parts of the planet. So it's look like our body. When you cut your fingers, say for example, the whole body will be affected. That's the analogy that we have to think of planetary health. And this is very powerful, I think, a message to everyone. Therefore, whatever we do on forests, on ocean, or our biosphere, say for example, will be directly posing negative or positive effect to the whole, including human being.
Yes, Malaysia, for those who don't know, it's got an incredible industrial sector, and it's developed rapidly over the last 30 years. Can you make them work in conjunction together, the environmental ministry, the Minister of Industry, the industrial sector of Malaysia, and accelerate them on the net zero 2050 target you have for the country?
Yeah, the reset that we have at the moment, post-COVID, is very good because all technologies, industries now are getting difficult to grow, especially to penetrate certain markets, for example, European countries and whatnot. So we have to reset, and this is the best time for us to look into a greener pathway into industrialization.
Okay, good. You're confident of it, which I think is interesting, but we'll come back to the rubber sector, the palm oil sector, the auto sector in Malaysia as well. And I said we had a very diverse group here. Irene Henniger has EREN, and it's making the connection between the artistic community and the scientists who are represented on the roundtable today. Give us a taste of how you see your role in trying to bridge the gaps that Tom and Joe talked about here.
Yeah, it's actually going into a dialogue between different knowledges, because I can just give you an example. I was growing up in Switzerland, so we have a lot of mountains, we have streams, we have lakes. But the first time I ever was at the sea was when I was 16 or something. And education at that time was actually more into how do you call the streams and so on. There was not really an ecological attempt in everything, or the connections. Well, the connections maybe. And what for me is really interesting about this art-science interaction is bringing artists to connect with scientists that are really researching in this field, but also artists having their own experience, materiality, and also coming from different places. So having this exchange to kind of understand the global systems of water and different waters. In Switzerland, it's more solid. It's more solid water in glaciers, and you see them just melting away. So we have this exchange between scientists and artists from different countries that we get an understanding of like the local and regional challenges to kind of think about solutions for the future.
It's very interesting. I want to just do a quick follow-up with you. Does it also underscore the role of the indigenous populations in the country, a greater understanding?
Yes.
If the artist can bring that to the fore with the scientific community, do you think?
Indeed. I think we've grown up also with a certain, let's say, understanding of who has the knowledge. And I think we tended to say, okay, modernity or contemporary, it's the scientists that have the knowledge. But actually we have our ancestors and indigenous people, people in the mountains, they really know how to read their environment. And I think this has been really left apart for too long, actually. And I think this intergenerational sharing of knowledge again and dialogue was also left out in a way of like really being on a runway, to the future. And I think now we have to rethink the system or how we flow into a future.
Terrific. Thanks for taking the follow-up. Mohammed Slais, who comes from DNAT, which is the research arm for the the pearl divers, and that is in your DNA. It's in the culture of the GCC, for those that know the region. But Bahrain was particularly passionate because it's part of the development plan to make sure it was preserved. What do you bring? The reason I wanted to talk to you about the indigenous role is what do you bring to the science community in the relationship with the Research Institute, with the real hands-on experience that you have with the oyster?
Yeah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I've just recently joined Donut, so it's been a year and a half. And when I first joined, I realized, okay, I'm with a bunch of scientists, and where am I going to help or where am I going to fit? But after going through the first project, I realized how much my input was so important for the whole team to create the types of researchers or try to pinpoint what they're looking for. And my info was one of the strongest out of the group, and then that led them to decide what to do. And I found my use for them, you know. So that's being in the environment the whole time and knowing what changes and what things look like all the time. The scientist doesn't know, you know, they're just using numbers and they're using data to put together. But I know that I can see when they finish the data, I can see, okay, but you didn't think of this part because that's what I saw, like for instance. And there's a lot of things that happen, like even pinpointing locations of where to do the research. Being in the sea, I know where the oysters will grow and where the oysters won't grow because of practice, because of the experience I gathered through the years.
Great.
So this is where I found it.
Yeah, give us a sense of your appreciation for the seas here and these very different waters than you'd find in anywhere else in the world. For those of us that have gone into the waters here, it's a very different world, but your appreciation for Mother Nature and the ocean.
Living in Bahrain, it's an island, first of all. So if you want to connect with nature, you got to go to the sea. We don't have mountains. We don't even have a desert. It's just we're a small island, and that's what led me to like fall in love with the sea because I live in an island, first of all, and this is how like it's a love. It's definitely a love that you create, and you want to protect it, even though, like for instance, when I was young, if I wanted to go to the sea, I would go fishing. But after I learned how to dive and then see the fish, I hated fishing because I don't want to kill the fish because I want to see it. That's how I started loving it more. And it's important that we connect to nature all the time, of course. We feel better when we see things in nature. It makes you feel better. And that's how I...
Good. And so UNESCO World Heritage destination now, right? That says a lot for Bahrain to make sure that that happened.
Yeah, like because Bahrain has always been the hub for pearl diving, because of our shallow waters, like I was talking to them about earlier, they were saying about South Africans, they're worried about the sea because it's scary. We don't get scared because we don't have great whites, we don't have deep seas. So it's not just because we have oysters, it's a safe place to dive. You don't get scared because there's not a lot of creatures underwater. And when we started in 2012, when Bahrain got the pearl beds got registered under the UNESCO World Heritage, that was like an important part because that shows like these pearl beds were fished not by just Bahrainis. The same beds were fished by the Kuwaitis. The Emiratis used to come all the way there. The Omanis used to come all the way there. So we protected the place for the whole Gulf, not just for Bahrain.
Right.
So that's
it's funny. I'm from California originally, and you know, the Channel Islands off the coast, and it's filled with great whites. And I had a friend of mine who was a sea urchin diver, and he said, I never really thought about great whites until there was one about 10 meters away from me. And then I thought about it, and he dove into his urchin net to survive. But that relationship under the sea, you realize how insignificant the human can be. Let's bring in our virtual guest. Nina, it's good to see you, and thanks for your patience. Same thing, Katya. Nina, I think this would be a great conversation to bring up so we have some continuity of this series that we have here in the World Majlis, and that is the relationship between the ocean and space. You're one of the few that actually embraces this. What is that relationship that you think we should understand in terms of exploration and the healing, reimagining the ocean today?
Well, I think, first of all, it's kind of surprising that we know more about space than we do about our ocean. We've explored probably only about 5% of the ocean, mapped maybe 20% of it. Yet we keep sending scientists and astronauts into space to discover more of that, rather than the mysteries of the deep ocean and everything that we have here on our own planet. And to continue on from the discussions that you've had so far, I mean, the ocean is the most important thing that we have. All life on this planet originated in the ocean. We came from the ocean. And the fact that we're treating it as a massive waste dump is so surprising to me. And for me, that's also where the space component in part comes in. Because yes, we are doing a lot of exploration in space, but we're also using the ocean as a dumping station or a space graveyard where we are literally disposing of or dumping space waste into this Pacific graveyard. So multiple dimensions connecting space and the ocean, but this one I find the most frightening.
Yeah, let me follow up quickly with you. Do you think that the satellite technology, in terms of understanding the vastness of the ocean, patrolling even the ocean from the super fish trawlers and the rest, we could have a symbiotic relation where space actually supports reversing of our impact on the marine ecosystems? The power of it.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, we're in the midst of what they're calling the fourth industrial revolution, where a number of new technologies are becoming available to us to monitor what's going on this planet. And of course, space stations, satellite technology and monitoring, coupled with advanced robotics, artificial intelligence, and so forth, enables us to much better understand what is actually happening both on the Earth, but also in the ocean, and the interconnectedness between all of this. So there needs to be a close interplay between the technologies that we're using in space and the ones that we're using down here, so to speak.
Good. That also avoids, in a sense, the abuse that we see in the oceans, does it not, Nina? I mean, you can call it like it is. We have these super giant trawlers going around the world and not governed.
Yeah, well, I think that's, of course, a very complex problem, and satellite technology doesn't necessarily solve it in itself. I mean, there is still a huge need for more data and knowledge about what is actually going on in the ocean, who are the people behind the super trawlers or the illegal fishing fleet that is operating on the high seas, for example, and of course then exposing them and holding them accountable for their actions. So I think if we were able to develop a system where we were much better at sharing openly data about the situation in the ocean, the different operators, be it legal or illegal, and the total impact of these activities on our ocean, it would be much easier for regulators to regulate the activity, for investors to invest in the right companies and technologies, and of course for us as consumers to make everyday choices based on that information.
Great. Katja, thanks for your patience. It's great to have you. I think people would be fascinated to know what you're doing now with the Energy Observer. You have a different crews that go in and off this catamaran, but it's game-changing in the sense that we know what the potential of hydrogen is. That's a good leaping off point. Do you want to take it from there?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. So Energy Observer is the first hydrogen ship going around the world without emitting any emissions. So the goal there with the first ship was to prove that renewable energies are already here and present for us to be able to use them. So we're using a lot of solar energy, we're using wind power, obviously, and then storing the excess of renewable energy into hydrogen, which gives us our autonomy at sea. And there's a second ship actually that will be built in 2025, and it's going to be a cargo ship. And this one is going to be fueled with liquid hydrogen. So I think what all of you said earlier, I think the key point here is everything is interconnected. As you said, there's not like oceans, there's just one ocean, and everything here, terrestrial or marine, everything is interconnected. So our climate here on Earth depends on the ocean. The oxygen we breathe here depends on the ocean. If you overfish a fish in the Atlantic, you might actually deplete population in Europe or in the Mediterranean Sea. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. If you overfish or if you pollute, you are going to affect yourself, but also others around the planet. And with the shipping industry, this is where Energy Observer is really trying to make a change, is that our consumption of goods every single day, whether it's consumer goods, whether it's fuel, whether it's cereals, anything for the cattle, that also impacts the ocean a lot, because all those goods are actually carried around the ocean by boat, and they are polluting a lot. So I think we have to realize how much we depend on the ocean and how much the ocean depends on us. Like our plastic pollution, for example, is reducing the photosynthesis of the organism producing our oxygen. So everything is interconnected, and we have to see it as they said, as a whole instead of trying to put things in boxes.
Good. Can you share whether those in the industry that are actually the shipping and logistics companies of the world think this is a novelty that you're involved in, or it's the real deal, that you can actually make an energy transition in the cargo shipping industry? And how long do you think that transition is, Katja?
Well, actually, there's an international maritime organization, and this organization has set some really good goals for 2025, 2030, 2040 and 50. And if most of those cargo want to keep going to the big ports, like lots of ports in Asia, Singapore, for example, but also like in the United States, in Los Angeles, they'll have to comply to some really strict pollution rules by now. And they have invested a lot in LNG, for example. So it's a liquid natural gas, but it's still a fossil fuel. Basically, it's methane. So this is a good transition energy, but everybody knows, all the big players in the industry, they know that by 2030, 2035, they'll have to completely change the way they're shipping, and they will need to rely on other sources of energy that are much cleaner. And this is where hydrogen can really, I mean, it's not the only solution, but it's a very good solution if it's produced with renewable energy. Hydrogen is a vector of energy. It's not an energy in itself, and it has to be produced by green energy. Otherwise, you're just displacing the issue. But green hydrogen can actually definitely be a key for those big players in the industry for us to be able to continue a global economy.
Yeah, for somebody who covered this sector for off and on for 20 years, there was so much pushback in the last 5 years when the IMO, as Katja is talking about, came up with these ideas. They're like, no way, you can't do it, we can't have the scrubbers for this. But the industry is changing pretty fast. We did talk about this need for the infrastructure to support that transition. So whatever you have in Asia has to also be in the United States and Europe, which is not easy. I want to ask a couple of different questions, and I'll let you pick which one you want in the second round of our topics. Either, what is the greatest threat in trying to reverse the impact on the marine ecosystem? What prevents us from achieving it? And Joe, you touched upon it, but I think it's something we need to embrace more. How do we educate society on this? Tom, do you want to start? Because I know you're passionate about this connection that the human species has to have with the ocean today.
So the way I would answer the question about the greatest threat is that the compartmentalization, and some of the other speakers have addressed that, the idea that we're going to work on hydrogen, or we're going to work on pollution, or we're going to work on climate change, this parsing of the problem. I think leads to a sense of helplessness among the public, or it leads to this kind of hyper focus on certain aspects without considering the whole. Personally, I find the concept of the Anthropocene to be liberating, because if we acknowledge that humans are the largest geologic force on the planet, it makes the issue of our relationship with the planet a kind of imaginable whole. And for me, that's critical toward addressing any of these issues, because it helps to bring together a mindset that says it's not a game of whack-a-mole. This is really about gathering all of these resources and really focusing on what's going to create a more productive relationship with the planet, which doesn't mean that you don't choose priorities, but you maintain a view of the context. And I think as the general public, if we can get large numbers of people able to think in those terms, it also helps governments and industry and others whose actions are essential to take those actions and to lean into it rather than resisting it.
We're quite destructive as a force, though, the human species, right?
Oh my God, yes. But, another parsing is we almost worship the wild, the wilderness, as something pristine, and our concept of our own relationship to it is, as soon as we touch it, we've spoiled it. We have to reconfigure that way of thinking, because we've touched everything, and we're continuing to touch everything in a whole lot of ways that people don't even imagine. We've moved the evolutionary clock 250 million years forward by moving species from continent to continent. So it's not a question of do we touch it or don't we, and it's not a question of our self-interest or the planet's interest. It's understanding that the two are one and the same, and that we must learn to touch it differently.
Good. How do you touch people, Joe? This is interesting, because recently my wife and I were watching a report from Alex Crawford of Sky News about women in Afghanistan so desperate without money, selling parts of their body, selling children to survive. It was so powerful that it actually led us, my wife in particular, to take action to try to, to help the situation. We actually built a small community to do so. You work in media. What influence do you think you can have on reversing this lack of connection with the ocean and your documentaries, and why you think you can marry your profession to also media? Is it for maximum impact?
Absolutely. And with us, it's about storytelling, because everybody loves a good story. But the one thing that the film will do is show people what's happening. You can read about it, you can be told about it, but when you actually see it, the expression, every picture, speaks 1,000 words. There's so much more to moving pictures. And we could talk about, for example, how parent birds are picking up plastic from the ocean and feeding it to their chicks. That's one thing, which sounds terrible. But when you've actually got on the screen a scientist with this dead chick in front of her and cutting it open and seeing all of the plastic inside, this little bird had died of starvation with a full stomach. It really makes you think, and you can relate to it much more when it's something that you've seen. One of the problems that I think we have in general is that we're getting very overwhelmed. There's so many environmental problems that we're constantly bombarded with, and when we're overwhelmed, we look away, we bury our heads in the sand because it's too much to think about. What we would like people to understand is that it's much better for many people to do something, or to stop doing something that's causing harm, because the impact of that is far greater than one or two highly educated people taking on the whole burden and trying to live that perfect life with the environment. There's so much that each of us can do, little changes we can make that will have the impact. But what education will do will connect people to it one step further. We'll understand why it's important. We'll make them want to do it, make them want to tell people. And humans are visual animals, and that's where films come in.
It's interesting. What do you think of Greta and her impact? I had a chance to cover her presence at the World Economic Forum, and a lot of people, as Tom was saying, that's the one camp, the activists in the other camp. And I actually asked her, are you going to meet with the oil and gas CEOs? And her handlers got very hostile with me, saying, why would you ask a question like that? And I was doing it in the spirit of a dialogue. But do we need heroes? And that's why we embrace something like Greta?
Well, I think everyone can be a hero. I think one thing that she has done is shown how one child can make a difference. You know, that don't just feel because you're one person on your own that you can't do anything. And she has certainly shown that can really impact, and also quite often embarrassing people into doing the right thing. Whether aggression is the right way or not, it's certainly not the way that I would go. I would rather bring people in and let them understand the reason why it's important, rather than point fingers and blame people, because I think that can put barriers up. But everybody works differently.
Yes, but the dialogue is also important. And one of the conversations we had at COP26 when I was in Glasgow is that the oil and gas community thought they were drowned out and not allowed at the seat at the table or not. And you do need to bring everybody to the table. You do,
and in fact I was speaking at COP26 as well, and I was finding it so interesting that everybody had been brought together, but also that everybody wanted to be there. It wasn't a case of, you know, you're the bad guys. It was like, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the best way we can do it. It's like working with fishermen when you want to protect a certain area. You don't say, right, we're going to stop you fishing there. You actually work with them and say, how can we make this best for the ocean, for the fish stocks, for your livelihoods and your families, without destroying it for everybody? And that's when it works, when people are involved in the conversation at all different levels, you know, from industry to the people that actually know about the ocean, which is the fishermen. You know, they've grown up in that culture. We were talking about indigenous culture. It's so important because those are the real experts. And yet, you know, everybody else that just thinks, oh, never mind about them, we've got the money, we'll do this. That's not the answer.
Very interesting. Dr. Zaini, why don't we drill into reversing the damage to the oceans, if you will, and the single-use plastic. You know, if we had this conversation 10 years ago, people would think we were crazy, right? Would we actually take responsibility? You're on a journey, between 2018 to 2030, right, on single-use plastics. Tell us, how do you get local support for it? How do you get the systems working? And do you get momentum behind a cause?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Rubber industry is very big in Malaysia. It started about 100 years ago. And we built tires and mattresses or whatever from latex that we produce. And people get excited and probably addicted to plastic. Instead of using banana leaves, they use plastic materials to take your food around. So as a result, this plastic material could pollute environment very easily. Of course, we know that the collection of solid waste is the main issue in many countries, not only in developing countries like Malaysia, but if you go to places like London or New York, you can see on the street every morning. And during rainy season, this will be entering a drainage system and end up in marine environment. So what we are trying to do now is to give incentive for people to not using single plastic. Say, for example, in my Ministry of Environment and Water, so we give them a proper packaging, food packaging, and I will be watching around and then talking to people why you are still using single plastic. Unless we show the way forward that single plastic is not sustainable and we can have better replacement, people will not change. So the point is this: we need people to lead the movement, the transition, the transformation. We cannot just say and then putting very nice regulatory framework for people to follow. I think it must start with people like me. I feel difficult to say this. Say, for example, before I retire, I wish I can cycle to work. Say, for example, please take my words.
You wish you would cycle to work?
Yeah, in Malaysia. It's not in London. That will be about around 18 kilometers away.
Yeah.
I've tried many times. It's doable, but sometimes I need to go to office early, and then to change my dress is a bit difficult in Malaysia. So the point is this: whatever we do, we need people to understand and try to start themselves, probably with little thing. And I have a theory to prove. If we start with any environmental movement or environmental initiatives, this group of people will be positive and proactive towards any environmental movement, any environmental initiatives. So we have to hit the button on single-use plastic, cycling, plugging. We crafted words in Malaysia on plugging. Plugging is very, very European. So we call it kuda, collecting rubbish while doing recreational activities. So yeah, so kind of thing. We make it popular in the country. And whenever new employees come to my office, I will take them along in Putrajaya and try to find rubbish to finish one container. So just allowing people to experience themselves, get started with the simplest thing in life. We don't change the economic system or the energy structures that cost billion and probably takes longer time.
Iren, I would love to get your thoughts on the relationship you were saying from an artistic standpoint and the relationship with the scientific community or the marine biologists, the forest on land and the forest under the sea. You've done this juxtaposition, but I think it would give our audience, both here and virtually, a greater understanding of the impact you think you can have with that relationship and understanding what the power of the sea really offers for the ocean.
I think we probably all have to start from what we know or where we come from, and then to kind of relate to something. When we see something else, we can relate back. And this happened to me when I went snorkeling. I'm generally a bit scared of oceans because I'm not used to this element. But for me, it was really mind-opening as well to see like the mountains under the water, and this whole biotope and everything, and something I know because I'm a lot in the mountains, and so I'm not afraid of heights. So, and I think to connect this very physical experience that we have, and through poetic ways exchange about that, can really change something in your perception. But it shouldn't stop there. This is what I'm always thinking, and then sometimes I feel really bad because I was growing up in a generation where, you know, it was just like our comfort zones, and it was going kind of upward, and nature was just there, like in Switzerland. So there was not a lot of awareness. And I think it's very important that we are aware as well that we need to leave our comfort zones. Each and every person can, I think, with small changements in their lives, maybe not consume this or not consume that, or maybe change these cans to water bottles, I don't know, to make a small change and to interconnect the possibilities of where we can cut back, but because we have to cut back. I think there is no way around it. Each and every person has to cut back. And I think people that are in certain positions can use also their power to make these restrictions also happen in realms that we are not accessing as individual people. And I believe really a lot in this generation that is growing up now. And I believe in the dialogue and not saying, oh, but we'd have to take responsibility. I think our generation has to take responsibility in a way, even though the world was a different one and was not so interconnected. But nowadays we have the possibilities to have this dialogue, to really learn from each other, and to have like a much broader horizon. But unless we are not willing to really take a step back on what we are used to, or leaving our comfort zones, I think it will be quite difficult.
That's very interesting. I'll follow up on it. We're a little bit spoiled as a generation if you're a baby boomer, right?
Yeah.
We're finding this out. We didn't see conflict to the scale that we're seeing today on Europe's doorstep, and people are watching with alarm. But we've lived pretty happily, right? Development,
Yes.
jobs, access to energy, access to water, electricity, and the rest. Mohammed, you bring a very interesting perspective as a pearl diver and working in the research group of Danat on the relationship of maintaining an industry, which is the pearl industry, and doing so sustainably. So you can have success in this relationship with the ecosystem if you do it well. What do you mean by that?
I'll give you an example. For instance, when maybe 2 years ago, when I started going out with certain pearl divers, I noticed that some captains, we call them nokhada, like he'll be in charge of driving the boat, and we're the divers. So it's a bit still traditional the way we do it, except using the new instruments like scuba diving kit and all that. They used to do it free diving. What I noticed that is like if we go to a pearl bed, for instance, there's some captains will let us dive here for one dive because we usually dive 3 times, and then when we come up, he won't let us dive back onto the same ground. He'll move us, and even if I tell him, "Oh, there's so many oysters," or "There's big ones," or no, move on, because he learned throughout the years that you have to be sustainable. You have to make sure that you don't deplete the ground you work with. So I learned that, and I'm like more environmentalist than he was. He probably throws garbage in the sea, but he knew that if he let us dive again onto this ground, it won't help him later on in the future because he needs to come back and make his living out of it. So learning that from a captain, I understood that as a diver, when you tell him, or like someone who sees that he's doing some damage, he will take action. But someone who doesn't know what's going on, like for instance, when you throw something in the sea, most of the time you know that's going to go somewhere else, so you don't see it anymore. But when you throw in the sea and it comes out to your front beach, then you're going to go pick it up. But when it's in the sea, you don't know where it's gone, and you won't see it. You just forget about it, and you don't care about it. So this is where the divers or the fishermen or all that, they'll be the ones who protect it before we do something about it. Like even fishermen, they always want to make sure there's fish for the next season. That's what they care about because they're going to make money out of it. But at the same time, they're keeping it sustainable.
It's fascinating. The responsibility that Joe and both you and were talking about, you say it applies to you in the pearl diving business. Katya, I'd like to bring you in on the industry itself. There's 35 major players, you tell us, in the shipping industry. And how do you have that collective responsibility? You know what it's like in business. It's like I've got to make a profit, and I can't be the first mover in a space that puts me or exposes me to risk for my shareholders, or if I'm a privately held company. What are you trying to do here to influence the collective responsibility that we're hearing from the panel at the World Majlis?
Yeah, so there's more than 100 different countries that have ships for shipping industry, but there's 35 major players, major countries with a lot of those ships. And that's where it gets complicated because you need rules and regulations and legislations from different countries to try and protect the environment and the ocean. That is one big ocean where everyone, feels like it's a free ground and they can kind of do anything because it's not very regulated. And that's, I think, the major issue at hand is try and find a way. And that's what the International Organization of Maritime Organization is trying to do, is try and regulate all those different countries and all those different ships and people with different backgrounds and different needs and different kind of funds as well. And one way that major ports can have a big impact on that is that a lot of the trade goes to a couple of key ports in the world. And if they change, and if they say, well, we're only going to open our ports to certain types of ships that have a certain energy grade or a certain green grade, then that would actually change a lot. And that's what, for example, Los Angeles is starting to do, is allowing access to the port only for green ships. But then usually what that means is that you're going to privilege the rich countries over the countries or the smaller industries that don't necessarily have the funding to do that change very quickly. So it is a big problematic. And I hear what the other panelists were saying. Sometimes it just gets a little bit overwhelming. There's so many different problematics, and how do you solve everything? Is individual action enough? If I become vegetarian, is it really going to change the world? But at the same time, with so many people on this planet, if we all eat meat 2 times a day, of course, it's going to have an impact on the planet. So, but at the same time, we need a global change, whether it's how we, interact with the environment and how we protect the ecosystems, whether it's on land or on the ocean, but also the energy transition. I think energy is going to be a big issue. And we need to change. I mean, we see it right now, right? With this war in Ukraine, Europe has prices going up and all around the world. And we really need to change our energy source, because this is also a very big component of this ecological transition. I think what we need collectively is also an idea, something towards which going. We know everything that we're doing wrong. We know all this pollution and all this drama and all this distraction and all this death, but we don't really see clearly another kind of story. And this is where artists are really important, is to start and create this other storytelling, to say, okay, we could do it differently. This could be a reality if we change. And so collectively we'll have this clear idea towards which to try and work. And I think that's really what we're lacking at the moment, like a clear view of how it could be different.
Wow, it's a vision thing. We'll get into that, which is really interesting in terms of grasping it and the role of the media. I just want to ask Nina one more question, then I'll come back as well. So I think it's a great point that she brings up here, right? Do you want to do it quickly, because she was pointing to you at that?
I just wanted to add, I think art is probably one of the last spaces where you have the freedom, not like to act or to think with a result, but really, have this space to think and to interact. And this, not driven by I want this or I want that, is so important in nowadays world, because we are so used to, being focused on results.
Yes, okay.
That's just
no, it's a fantastic point that you're making. Nina, I wanted to talk to you about the practical role, if you will, of a sovereign fund. So the wealth of Norway was built by its oil and gas, but the Norwegian sovereign fund is trying to take action. I know the considerations here in the UAE by, say, a Mubadala, which is a development fund, joining the Hydrogen Council, and the impact money, if you could see from the Malaysian fund, for example, or in Singapore with Temasek as well. What's your experience here of trying to influence industry and the investment community to accelerate the reversal of some of the damage we've seen and have best practices of the future, Nina?
Well, I think investments and large financial institutions play a key role in solving the major challenges that we are facing. And of course, making real decisions in terms of what we are choosing to invest in and what we're choosing not to invest in will fundamentally change everything. And I remember one of the biggest climate decisions that I was ever part of was influencing the Norwegian Sovereign Fund to divest from coal. And it's these kind of decisions that we need large sovereign funds and financial institutions to take. And it doesn't stop necessarily at coal or at other energy sources. It basically stops at funding destructive practices that are destroying not just the ocean, but our fundamental life existence. And increasingly and thankfully, large investors are waking up to this reality and taking increasing steps to stop investing in destructive practices and setting clear demands for the companies and projects that they are investing in to both reduce their carbon intensity, to show their biodiversity footprint, and to show how they are aiming to be not just net zero, which is a popular term at the moment, but actually becoming planet positive. So that you're not just reducing your impact, but that you're actually contributing to restoring what has already been destroyed.
Well, it's really interesting. I think I want to pause here for a second to hear from our friends in Mauritius that are talking about the coral reef trade. But when we come back from that intervention, and we'll glean what they're saying as well, I think we should deal with like the elephant in the room, is like how much can the Earth manage in terms of population? Oftentimes it's not part of the climate discussion, it's not part of the discussion about protecting oceans as well. So I'd like all of 7 of you to kind of weigh in on that debate, because it's not come up in this section of the World Majlis, and I think it should. But let's have our team behind the scenes here get our interjections from those in Mauritius. Thank you.
Greetings. I am Daniel Marie from the Mauritius Oceanography Institute. For me, the best way to get people aware about something, you have to bring them on board, you have to get them involved in whatever you're doing. So our experience is, in Mauritius, we started by culturing coral in a land-based and sea-based nurseries in the year 2008. After that, we have transplanted the coral fragments from the nurseries to the degraded corals so that we can rehabilitate those coral reefs. After that first program, we have submitted a pilot project to the government of Mauritius for funding. This project aimed at the training and capacity building of our local fishers to rehabilitate our reef. At the end of the project, we have been able to train around 100 fishers. We have been able to sensitize thousands of locals from different places around Mauritius. We have been able to also bring to the cognizance of the Mauritian nation how the coral reef is performing in Mauritius and what needs to be done to further preserve our coral reef ecosystem. To date, the government of Mauritius has extended this program so that we can train up to 1,000 fishers and locals around the island, and at the same time, other initiatives to culture coral and to rehabilitate our coral reef has been increased, and we have got UNDP and UNEP who has decided to fund more projects in Mauritius in the same endeavor.
My name is Jacqueline Sauzier. I'm the president of the Mauritius Marine Conservation Society. We have been working for the last 30 years at preserving the marine ecosystem. To preserve ecosystems, and especially the coral reefs, as Daniel explained to you earlier, we have sunk about 14 shipwrecks around the island, increasing the amount of natural coral reefs and biodiversity around the island. While doing so, we have noticed a rich biodiversity of marine mammals and sea turtles around the island. The last point that the Mauritius Marine Conservation does is also on the preservation of marine turtles around the island. We do not stop here. While doing our sensitizations to the Mauritians, we also try to touch the authorities. We also need the legislation and the correct framework so that the marine conservation is done around the island in a common way. We are all in the same boat, and we need to work together so that we can preserve this extreme biodiversity that we have around the island, and that we can leave something for our children in the future. Thank you very much.
Made me want to travel to Mauritius first thing. Wouldn't mind doing a session there on the sea, right?
Good idea.
Dr. Zaini.
Yeah, this is very interesting, the experience in Mauritius. We have small islands in Malaysia, Tioman, Penang, Langkawi. The biggest issues that we are facing on environmental protection is on sewage collection and treatment. The more people living in that environment, the more the need for us to provide the facilities for sewerage services. So this is something that we are now struggling. On that note, I have to say this. On sewerage services connected to the sewer network in Malaysia is about 80% of the population. This is very high.
And the seaway connections.
Sewage.
Yeah. Sewage connections.
Yeah.
Wow.
Of course, Singapore is about 100%. Japan is only 80%, more or less similar to Malaysia. United States is less than 80%. So the experience that we had in Peninsula and main islands in Malaysia is not similar to small islands that they have in Mauritius and other places. We cannot use that model in smaller islands. We have to have new technologies. This is what we are now facing. My colleagues in Malaysia are trying to develop a framework. Instead of having sewer network, we might have a nature-based treatment facilities such as natural wetlands, natural constructed wetland. You have to construct something, allowing discharges from old houses or remote resorts, say, for example, to be treated using septic tank, and then the discharges from septic tank going straight to the constructed wetlands to protect the ecosystem around the islands, the corals and the beauty around it. Otherwise, the more people coming to that area, the more pollution you will find.
Very good point. Nina, very quickly before we get to the issue of population, they talked from Mauritius about sinking ships, right, to create these this coral community and allow it to prosper. The oil rigs of Norway, you know, the oil rigs of the Middle East and other parts of the world, you have to clean them, and I've done stories on this in the past, and make sure that they're safe to sink. But what's the experience from Norway you want to share with this audience?
Well, I think one of the exciting ideas that we are looking into at the moment is, of course, rather than decommissioning old oil rigs that are ending their end of lifetime, is considering whether they can actually be used as infrastructure or continued artificial reefs for life in the ocean. And of course, I think globally there is something like 6,000 oil and gas platforms. And if we were to remove all of these, it would have a tremendous impact, but it would also cost hundreds of billions of dollars. If we instead invested this money in restoring and protecting the ocean and using these platforms as infrastructure for new exciting ocean solutions, whether it's food production, large-scale seaweed for carbon capture. It could be used as infrastructure for data centers at sea or for fueling stations for ships. I mean, a whole range of exciting new business adventures rather than removing them or decommissioning them as they're called. And then, of course, they are also aggregation, functioning as aggregation for marine life as well, in the same way as the wrecks that have been sunk will be establishing natural or new reefs.
Great, thank you very much. So I want to just make sure our microphones are ready so when we go to the Q&A section, which will be in about 7 or 8 minutes. But I'm just going to keep this open because it is a modulus about the issue of population from your perspective, from the artist community, from the environmental community. Tom as a designer, a documentary producer, marine biologist, our virtual friends. It's something that we don't talk about, but how much can the ocean absorb from a population of 7 billion and growing? Have you given it thought, Joe, yourself?
I have. I mean, a lot of the problems that we have, you know, from corruption to pollution and everything else, is due to the fact that there are far too many of us. But it's not an easy one to address. And certainly, I think everyone's aware that China went very hard on this and, you know, was saying that you could only have one child per family. But the problem was they wanted boys. And that has created all sorts of problems since. I think, for a start, the role of women in society needs to be understood. And we need to be seen as equals, and there are so many roles that women are excluded from. The very fact that they took it on recognizing there was a population problem, and then suddenly there's so many boys because the girls were just not wanted. And
which is extraordinary to think.
Yes.
It's such a recent history that it would
Yes.
even be part of the conversation, right?
Yes, but I mean now it's that they can have more. But what does happen, you know, when those boys grow up and there aren't enough girls, and it's the other thing is, of course, it's so-called designer babies now. If that problem remains, then you know that will create another one, and there's going to be, you know, more aggression building up. I think people need to understand. Women need to take their place in society and be recognised and not kept in the background.
Right, Nina, I saw your hand go up. You want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I think, of course, population growth is a problem, and it's a problem because we are consuming too many resources, but everything shows that the world could actually handle the population that is currently living here if we manage the resources better and if they were distributed more fairly. I mean, if everyone lived as a Norwegian, as an example, we would require almost 3 planets to deal with the consumption patterns that we're having. So I think we really drastically need to look at our own consumption, whether it's linked to energy, food, especially waste of this, clothing, electronics, all sorts of things, and get it down to below 1. We cannot use more resources than should be available for one individual person, and find a way to redistribute the wealth and the resources so that it's more fair across the planet.
Okay, I'm going to go through all the women to say that we're going to give the voice to the women first. Then I'm going to circle around to the boys. Very popular with my 2 daughters, if they were sitting in the audience. Katja, please.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Ina said. I think overpopulation is an issue for 3 different reasons. First, the number of people on this planet, but then also our resources that we use. As we said, there's a big difference between someone living in Switzerland, like me, or someone living, I don't know, maybe in Nigeria, for example. Like, we consume completely differently. And then also our energy source is a big one as well, because obviously, you could have a fridge and an oven and everything if you knew that using it wouldn't impact the planet as much as it does today. So, yeah, if those 3 components, they will act together. But there's also something that says that the more you think your appliances are green and that your energy is renewable, then the more you use it as well. So we really have to try and understand that everything is connected again, and to really look into how we consume it, how we consume our food, goods, how we consume our energy. And on Energy Observer, for example, we're very aware of that because all our energy comes from the sun, right? And we only have a certain amount on the boat, and we have to propel ourselves with it. So we are very conscious about how much it costs to toast bread, or how to cook anything on the boat. We get really, really conscious of it. So, and when I go home, I'm like, oh my God, this is just too much energy everywhere. And people don't even realize how much they're using every day. So it is a 3-component issue, and one of it being the number of people, but also how we consume and where the energy comes from.
Excellent. Iran, you want to round out the panel of the women here?
Well, yes, I can only agree to what you were saying. And what I see at our university, Zurich University of the Arts, is really that a lot of initiatives and really changements are initiated by our students. And this is really great. I mean, this is really a big hope. And one thing that I look at with very critical mind is really this exploration of the skies in a way, because it feels like it's, you know, like technology will make it, and actually it's just another way of exploiting another space. And it's a little bit like the boys and their toys. And so I think I would also say more women in certain places would maybe also help to get a different mindset on how you preserve or how you think about communities and not continuing the race in a way for more power. Let's live with
I didn't
less
understand
power.
why Jeff Bezos wore those cowboy boots when he was flying.
Yeah.
But still looking same.
I think in relation to population, what is important is one, education. The other one is location. We don't want to get people concentrating in urban centers, say, for example.
That's been the trend, right?
Yes, in many places in the world. So what we are trying to do to give facilities to outside the major cities. Kuala Lumpur is the smallest capital in Asia. We have only 2 million population out of 32 million population of the country. So we have only 2 million. So the congestion in Kuala Lumpur is not as bad as some places. So what we are trying to do is try to develop facilities in the rural area so that people come closer to the city, but outside the city, and working outside the city.
Yeah, Putrajaya is an example of that, right?
Seremban, Putrajaya, and few other places, which is about 1 hour by train or 1 hour by car to the Kuala Lumpur. And there is nothing in Kuala Lumpur anyway.
Yes.
So, everything has been dispersed, so you can get facilities outside the city center. The biggest shopping mall is not in Kuala Lumpur.
Good. Although I like the ones with the Twin Towers. Sorry. I just want to finish off with here before we come back. Mohammed, what are your views on population, even with Bahrain, with its limited space in which to work? And I know this is a delicate subject in the Islamic world, and whether we should be talking about the size of families or the rest. We have, incredible population growth in a country like Egypt. What thought have you given to it yourself?
I believe we are here to reproduce, but how we reproduce, I was against having children, for instance, till I grew up, till I got to a certain age, then something clicked and said, it's time to have kids. And I think space, we still got up there. I'm not saying that we have to go to space, but if we build going upwards, we won't be going and destroying everything else. And I had a thought earlier about the catamaran. Okay, we humans, we are the energy source, aren't we? And why can't we just all row? Why can't we go back to that? Because we are the energy, humans are the energy source. That could be the solution, I guess, maybe one day. And I think that God will always solve it for us somehow.
Well, it's interesting what you said. Metaphorically, if we could just row in the same direction when it comes to policy, would be a great achievement in itself, right? Instead of the different silos that we've been talking about in this panel, saying we need to break through and collaborate, which would affect even a pearl diver or anybody else. Tom, any thoughts on this yourself? What have you been thinking in that front?
Yeah. Well, we tend to think of population as something that we need to mandate in a sense, but the point that Nina was making about consumption and about disproportionate consumption also works in reverse. One of the great things about being an exhibition designer is I get to work with amazing people doing all sorts of wild things. And I worked for years with a statistician named Hans Rosling, who worked out of Stockholm and aggregated data from around the world. And one of the trends, actually there are 3 trends that he saw with relation to population. One of them was, as soon as you educate women, the number of children per woman goes down. Second thing is, if you reduce infant mortality, the number of children goes down. And the third thing is, if you increase life expectancy, the number of children goes down. So if we improve the way we distribute resources, if we improve the economic distribution, then at least based on his research, we can expect that trend to continue, that actually we don't have to say don't have children. What we have to do is raise the standard of living in an equitable way such that people don't feel the pressure to have one child after another, which is a tradition born of infant mortality and of the negative consequences of living in societies with shorter life expectancies.
It's very interesting. It goes back to the education, I think, Joe, is what you were talking about too. I mean, it's all interrelated. The more we can educate our societies as well, and as we were suggesting, give power to the women. It's funny because in the media business, it's almost incredible because I've been reporting to women since I started, literally from my first job. So we never thought of, oh, that's a female manager and that's a male manager. We're pretty gender agnostic when it comes to the media. But we could use more of that, right, in all different sectors around the world, I think, particularly in science. Danny, do you want to jump in before we take questions?
Some places we have problems with too many women in some areas. In Malaysia, education sector, 80% are women teachers.
Thank God.
In medical professions now, including my wife, 80% of them are women.
That's a good thing, Zany. No,
that's a good thing, but I need also male doctors to make sure that some parts of my body to be examined properly.
I have a funny doctor story here in the UAE. It was a urologist. It was just very funny. I shook hands with her after she examined me. She was, I can't touch your hand. I said, oh, really? Why not? You did contact me in other parts of my body. So we have to get that education through. I almost fell over. I was just like, I forgot where I was. Let's take some questions from the audience. We have one here in the second row. If we can get the mic. Is there a second question so we can save also moving the microphone around? Please. Melania here in the front row. If you can identify yourself, and because of time, just direct your question to somebody specifically if you want.
Well, to the lady in Norway, because of Norway's fund on fossil fuels.
Let's start by calling her a woman. That's what my daughters would tell me. But,
I was wondering the megalodon in the oceans that we haven't spoken about, which is the methane sitting on the seabed, which is equivalent to 17,000 years of emissions. And it may be unfrozen as soon as the ocean reaches 4 or 5 degrees. That, I think, is a mega issue. And you're talking about living oceans, but with that, there's no living oceans, there's no living anything if 17,000 years of greenhouse gas emissions are all of a sudden. So we're walking on thin ice. We're talking about humans being the problem with population, but that's a Malthusian theory. And then Esther Bosenrup, a woman 100 years later, said about sustainability coming from the humans, the innovations, and that's how we got to 8 billion, and we may have a population collapse according to Jack Ma and Elon. So I think we can be the solutions if we are preventive, but prevention costs 4 times less than adapting. So before we release 17,000 years of emissions of methane from the seabed, what can we do about it? What's Norway thinking about deploying their mega investment fund to tackle this?
Great, thank you for the question. Nina, it's for you. This is a topic that came up yesterday too, and this, if we warm up the environment, that we're going to have catastrophic consequences in the ocean.
Well, I couldn't agree with more with what was just said. And of course, we have a major, really undiscussed threat at our hands if methane really strikes in as an additional component to CO2. And of course, I can't speak on behalf of the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and I can't speak on behalf of Norway. Personally, I've been working as an environmental activist trying to influence both to stop fossil fuel development from a Norwegian government's perspective, and for the Sovereign Fund to stop investing in fossil fuels. I think both need to happen. The reports from the International Energy Agency are crystal clear. The report from the Climate Panel is crystal clear. There is no more room for any additional fossil fuels into the mix. We have to stop immediately, and we should have stopped earlier. So that means we cannot open up any new licenses for new oil fields, and we should stop investing in them immediately.
Okay, this is interesting. We had a methane pledge at COP26, but it's not a binding resolution, and that is found very disappointing. And everybody said, even John Kerry was saying it was a great progress to get the pledge together. It seems, Tom, to me, like, you know, we're just moving too slowly in this multipolar, multi-party world. So
COP26 is the report says that by next year, that $100 billion is what's collectively pledged toward action is going to be achieved. And I was just checking this morning, the 10 largest military budgets in the world add up to 15 times that annually. Yeah. So and where does the priority?
We didn't hit the 100 billion. We're 5 years behind on top of that.
So where are the priorities? And the cascading effects that is the same in the Arctic when the tundra begins to thaw and it starts to release methane. You've had the same kind of issues in the ocean and on the land. And you know, where's the urgency, really? I mean, that's the part that's so frustrating.
I couldn't agree more. Melania, you have a question from the front row here. Sorry, take the front row question. Thanks.
Hi, Melania. I'm an ocean scientist, so thank you for everything that you all do from different perspectives and sectors. As a scientist working in this field, I have experienced something called eco-anxiety or climate grief. And this is that sensation that Joe was, I believe, referring to, that we are overwhelmed by how many things are going wrong. And we stop being effective because we're just so overwhelmed by that sensation. So this question is, if anyone can relate to that, how do you protect your energy? How do you protect your inspiration so that you can continue pushing the momentum forward with other people?
Great question. Kate, do you want to jump in? Do you have a perspective on this? That there's so many challenges that people get kind of frozen in their tracks. And by the way, when I've spoken to different schools, it's the same feedback. They feel, you know, you've related with this earlier in your conversations. They feel really down about the future, and that's not what you want as well. You want the solutions, but they're waiting for us to move at a faster pace before they take charge. Kate, do you want to start?
Yeah, so personally, I can totally relate on that. I go through cycles of massive eco-anxieties myself. At some stage, I'm like, what's the point of continuing in this field? And like right now, at the moment, as we speak, we are hitting the 6th mass bleaching event on the Great Barrier Reef. So all the corals that I studied for my PhD, like only 5 years ago, are going to be completely gone in a very short amount of time. And as you said about the COP26, it's not moving fast enough. Like all the pledge that they took is only gonna kind of cover 20% of the gap that we're missing between the actual emissions today and where we need to be to reach net zero by 2050 and avoid exceeding the 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial average. So it is very difficult. How I deal with it is that I just think about, well, what am I going to do about it? Am I going to sit there and just keep on consuming because I'm a human being and my only presence in life is going to have an impact? Or am I going to actually try and do something and educate people around me and try and change my habits and reduce my consumptions and try and talk as many people as I can about those issues and educate people. What I love the most about being on the ship that I work on is actually having very young kids on the boat and seeing them so excited about new opportunities and all the very interesting questions that they ask about the future and the ecological transition. So yeah, personally, it's not easy. I don't think there's an easy fix to it, but it's really a question of where do you want to put your energy? Do you want to be part of the solution or do you want to be part of the problem? And it is an action, like a conscious choice that you have to make almost every single day.
Wow.
And try and do your best. You're not going to be able to save the world by yourself, but you can try and try and do your little part.
Yeah, that's what Zeni was saying as well. We have to take responsibility for it. Nina, you had your hand up there.
Yeah, just following on from what Katja was saying, of course, no one alone can fix the problems of this world, but everyone can do something. And I think actually using that energy that you're feeling when you're scared, and you're right to be scared. It is a very scary situation. We are at a point in our human history that we've never seen before. And it's basically up to us to do something about it. The biggest threat, I think, to our planet is the belief that somebody else will come and fix it. They won't. It's our time to fix it, and it has to happen now. So I think the important thing is trying to focus on the solutions, not necessarily drowning in the problems, but seeing that there are great solutions out there that can fix this. We know that the world can be fueled by 100% renewable energy, for example, even with existing technology and even with an increasing population. It's possible. We know that we can protect and restore our oceans so that they become productive again, but it will take time and it will require investments. And we also know that we can restore the same things on land if we change our consumption patterns and so forth. So I think for each individual, it's also a matter of making small incremental changes in your own personal life. What are the small steps or things that you can do that make you feel a little bit more empowered? You can do things like sharing important information in your social media. You can support an environmental organization. You can reduce your footprint by stopping to throw away food or using less energy. I mean, there are all these small things that if we all did this, it would have a huge positive impact on the planet.
Excellent. Dr. Zaini, your thoughts on the transformation of the Malaysian culture and an embracing of this? What's the experience on the ground as a minister?
I think it is very important for us to develop something, what Nina mentioned, that everyone must embark on something. We wrote a book called Eco Shift, Ecological Shift towards Holistic Environmental Sustainability. So in the book, we try to not only develop a framework using legislation. Legislation probably for many people is the most difficult to be implemented. You need regulators, you need courts environmental courts and whatnot. So it's very difficult. But if we can change the psychology, the people themselves, that's most powerful. So we embarking on planetary health, as I mentioned, but at the same time, we urge people to change their habits and behavior. Habit and behavior are two different kind of things. Habit is habitual. It is done naturally, subconscious mind, and you don't have to pay. You don't have to incentivize. 90% of what we do in life is habitual. 10% maximum is behavioral. Behavioral requires punitive and incentive. You have to pay them money. You have to pay them some kind of incentive, X amount of money if you buy this and buy that, And people go for that. They don't care about environmental protection. They care about incentive given. So for us, habitual change is more powerful, and this is what we are trying to do.
I just moved house about 6 months ago and went through this exercise of what was in your closet. Probably need about 30% of what's in the closet, right? And it goes back to Iren's idea, and the conversations have been brought up here about consumption. What do you need and what's a necessity? I think we have one more question from the floor here.
Excuse me.
Sorry, who was that?
Me.
Oh, there you go. I was looking at the big screen. I needed Mohammed to keep an eye, and we'll take one more question. Go ahead, please, Iren. Sorry.
Can I just add something to that? I think there is a big potential in creativity, in really linking knowledge and what we know with creativity and forms of expression as well. In terms to finding new solutions. And I think in the end, we probably will have to radically change our education, because we need a new resilience, and we will certainly need new skills. And I think this would be a big potential to think about that, to start very early. What does the world need, you know? What kind of knowledge do we need? And also embodied knowledge, of course. And how can we find like an expression as well of this depression, and change it into something positive?
Well, it's excellent, because I think our education system, I don't know why, should be a leading indicator, right, as we say in economics, and it's a lagging indicator. I mean, we're forced into e-learning. We talked about e-learning for 20 years, and the pandemic forced e-learning, right? We need to pressure our institutions and our governments to say, let's get on with it, right? I mean, what the children are learning, it's a good education, right, but it's missing these components. I think you'd agree, right?
The difficulty so often is that it promotes a linear way of thinking. And, you know, speaking about the arts, thinking about, okay, we are part of the problem and we're part of the solution. Bringing things that are polarized, that have, in a linear way of thinking don't fit together, bringing them into paradoxical juxtaposition, playing, exploring, being playful, which means stepping outside your frame of reference and looking at it from a different perspective, someone else's perspective, and being able to then re-engage freshly. Those are things that are so often lacking from education, and so often lacking, frankly, from the dialogue around these issues, because we take them so seriously, and they are. You know, this is the world we're talking about, right?
Right.
But sometimes you have to step out and play with unexpected juxtaposition, unexpected solutions, unexpected ways that things interact with each other in order to come back into it with a fresh mind and with new ideas.
Yeah, it's an open mind, right?
Sorry, also like in the education now, like the scientific knowledge that is taught is just not like the, you know, the up-to-date scientific knowledge very often, like in primary schools. And we had an excellent experience with a school where we went for a whole week with scientists and artists and worked on, like, that was forests, our ecosystem, in understanding what's the environment around and what is it used for, and so on. And it was amazing what happened. So if you take different skills together, it's so powerful. And it's also powerful in community building, because we tend to be so much in silos. Every one of us is working most of the time in, you know, in a silo ways. We have our colleagues, and we mostly agree or disagree, but not for other reasons maybe. And then to have critical questions from also lay people is so important.
Okay, it's a fantastic conversation. I'm going to take one more question, Kathleen, and then we'll have to wrap it up because we're already 5 minutes. But the conversation is so good, I didn't want to stop, actually. Please.
Yeah, I just want to really ask people back to the point that Melania spoke about, because I'm a maritime lawyer and strategist, and I've been pretty well working for probably 30 years in this space, and I've had those moments too. But I think I was outside walking in and I saw a huge audience around a clown. And so it makes me think about the arts and how important they are for us to play. But also I think about my country's Australia, and it has the oldest living race on the planet. 60,000 years they've been living there. And I think that we have a lot to learn from traditional people. And I'm just wondering about play, about arts, and about our own connection to nature for healing. So what does the panel think about this?
Take it, Joe, and why don't we wrap it up, because we're tight on time, but you'll have the final thought, yeah?
I think that the whole purpose of the work that we're doing at Ocean Generation, and it's going to come very much into the film that I'm in the fundraising process for, is about that connection that we have. It's also about going back to the people that understand it. And you mentioned Australia. They are so connected to the ocean. They know how to deal with the forest fires. There's so much that we've just switched off from because we think we're better or cleverer or more advanced. We're not. We're advancing in the wrong direction. It's time to start listening. And we are all we all come into this world as free divers. You know, you put a baby in the water, they know how to swim, they're not going to fight to come to the surface. You know, we need to understand this connection that we have. We talk about Mother Earth. I think it's much more Mother Ocean. And teaching children about it, they are the most powerful ambassadors we have. And certainly in the work I've done, the way the children will embarrass their teachers and their parents into doing the right thing because they understand and they get it. And they haven't got to the stage where they think being successful means making a lot of money. Actually, that's probably, well, it's certainly not my answer to success. It's what you give back. And what are you going to do about the future? You know, in Hawaii, everything they do, they think about how it's going to affect 7 generations beyond their own, not the time that you're a politician or your time on this earth. We need to be responsible for the generations that are going to follow.
Yeah, the long-term planning that's been in absence. I never knew Hawaii took that approach, so fantastic. Mohammed, we haven't heard from you, but I think because of what Joe said, I mean, you're in your space every day, right? I mean,
Yeah.
And the indigenous expertise that you bring, you touched upon it before. How do we apply it, as Kathleen was asking, in a wider sense of educating society? Do you see the children when they come and take your tour, they have that sense of wonder? Do you want to trigger that?
I think the most important thing is that we see it. If we don't see it, it's not there. So, like, even like for society to do that jump, like for instance, Corona brought for us that we had to use the internet, we had to do the e-learning. I don't want to say that this happens, but I think a big catastrophic incident will make us find a solution. Something that we see that happens in front of us, that's when we're going to find the answer. That's how I see it.
Well, that's very profound. So I'm going to finish on Tom here. We've had a pandemic, which probably once in 100 years. That was a big Spanish flu. We have a conflict in our hands right now that we never thought would happen, right, at our doorsteps. And it's not the only one, by the way, the only one that kind of gets covered at this level. Does that provide impetus to change and to lead for greater cooperation as opposed to what we see today?
I think that's an open question. I think it certainly can, and obviously it should. The question really is whether people are able to integrate that into a broader understanding of where we're going, or whether it becomes this one thing that we focus on once again and disregard everything else. So, you know, does any one of these issues give us an excuse to say, well, the environment can wait? It's all part of the same thing. And when I say it's all part of the same thing, I don't mean that each individual has to grapple with the whole. What I mean to say is that it gives us a context to understand the things that we can effect, the things that drive our own passions, but to understand how they fit into a larger picture. And I think if we keep coming back to that, if we're able to zoom in on what is it that I can do today, and zoom out on how does that fit with a planet that's thriving and a human population and all the rest of life thriving, then I think we have a greater chance for effectiveness than we do by just focusing on silo after silo after silo after silo.
Thanks. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, as emerging markets editor for CNN at the time, I had said my biggest worry out of this pandemic was the fact that we would not engage with the developing world. We would be cocooning and taking care of ourselves. And people were saying, I don't think so. We have these global organizations. That's exactly what happened. And we can't let it happen when it comes to this. Yeah. Let's give a nice round of applause. It was Series 2 of 4. I have to say, that was fantastic, as it was yesterday. So nice round of applause from those here in the audience. And a reminder, we'll be at the same time, same place, same theater, looking at the price of water tomorrow. So I want everybody on virtually and here to re-engage. If you want to take a look at these again, and I know you did that exercise before you sat on the panel today and enjoyed it, it's www.virtualexpo2020.com, virtualexpo2020.com. We also appreciate your feedback. This is something that could live beyond the expo, and what sort of format would you like? What do you want to engage with? What sort of feedback do you give us? Thanks a lot for handling all the different questions, and thanks for the questions from the floor as well.
Nice.
Thanks.